I'm Lucy from Study Work Grow. In this quick session, we're going to be looking at what you need to know to start building your own career education program. This session's come about because I have a lot of conversations with careers advisors, and what I find is that when they're just starting out with building a career education program, they often feel a little bit lost. Like there's a lot of different places where you can start, and they're not quite sure where they particularly want to start for their context. But when I talk to careers advisors or career counsellors or guidance counsellors or people working in schools building career and delivering career education, if they've been delivering it for a little while, or even if they've just got a starting point, like somebody's left them something from last time, I feel like they're much more confident and capable and they don't need any more support. Usually the programs they develop are really great and exciting and robust and they iterate. So it's really, for me, I think, finding out where you want to start, defining where you want to start for your particular context, that is the really tricky bit. So that's what we're going to cover today. And I'm also going to go over some of the things that I would often like to include in a career education program that I would be developing and delivering. So we're going to cover three things. We're going to start by looking at outcomes. Outcomes are so important, and we need to know exactly what we're aiming for with our career education program to be able to build something that's robust and that's actually going to deliver on those outcomes. Then next, we're going to look at what I like to put in career curriculum, or kind of what fits in career curriculum and what doesn't necessarily fit in career curriculum. And then also we're going to talk about how you can scaffold the content over time, because within a school or another learning context, you've hopefully got your students with you for 4 to 6 years, and maybe even a little bit longer in some contexts. And that's going to give you time to really build a program that allows them to come back to things, come back to ideas, change their mind, experiment, explore, and really build some robust skill sets. So because you've got that time, we're going to talk about how you can use that to your advantage. So starting out by thinking about, what does good career education look like? Because you do see some programs that have been developed that are less what I would call comprehensive. And so it's really important to know at the start exactly what you think your program should look like and what good would look like within your context. Knowing that your context is going to be different to my context, different to the context of the school down the road. So it's really about working out what good looks like for you and for your students within your context. I always think that the most important thing with career education itself is being able to build those core career management competencies, career development skills, those things that are going to help us, because the world of work is changing really fast. We are all going to need to be proactive, and we're going to need to have these skills to be able to manage our own careers. We can't rely anymore on finding an entry-level role and then climbing within the same company. That's not really a thing that we see as commonly anymore, and you certainly can't rely on it. So we need to have those skills, and they are specific skills, in order to be able to manage our careers and deal with this evolving world of work. Some of those skills are practical, like things like writing a resume, or knowing how to update your resume when you need to, or go for an interview, or even how to search for and read a job description. Those are really practical skills. But at the other side of things, we've also got core skills, like things like how to make decisions, because making decisions is really hard. I find it difficult sometimes to make decisions. And young people who've never been taught any kind of decision-making methodology, they've not been really introduced to goal setting in a robust career-related way, they might find it a little bit more difficult to make decisions for themselves down the track. And that's when you find them making really quick choices or choosing the easiest path because they don't have to think about it very much. So we really know that we need both of those sets of skills, the practical things and the core career development things within a career education program. So your program's going to need to kind of talk to both of those. Before we move on, though, I really want to mention that career curriculum is different to careers in the curriculum. So if you've been around for a little while, you might have heard people talking about careers in the curriculum. And what we mean by that is where you work with your teachers or your subject area teachers are able to find ways to bring real world context and relevance within their actual teaching, within their classroom content. So that might mean that within science or business studies, you're going to be bringing in a guest speaker, maybe somebody who runs a business locally or a local scientist, and they're going to talk about their work, and they're going to talk to the content, like the curriculum content, but they're also going to talk about their career, and they're also going to be a living, breathing role model and example for students of what a career in that field might look like. We also talk about project-based learning or developing some sort of assessment around a project that has real world relevance. That would be an example of careers in the curriculum. or even just learning about other people and the things that they've done in a way that is related to the curriculum content itself. Those real human examples can be another version of careers in the curriculum, but that's not what we're talking about with a career education program. Career education programs need to teach the actual skills that you need to be able to manage your career. And while you can do some of that with careers in the curriculum, I don't think you are able to cover all of that skill development just by talking to your subject area teachers and embedding it within the curriculum. I think we need to kind of do something a bit different there. So within curriculum, we talk about things like labour market information, goal setting, workplace rights and responsibilities, turning up on time, decision making, like I talked about before, all those things that you kind of can't really cover within the curriculum. So the next question we need to be asking ourselves is what actually should go in our career education program? And there are a couple of places that you can look for this. It's not to kind of like just go to the shop and pick up the instructions and then follow those. So you do need to do a little bit of thinking to work out what you want to actually put in your career education program. I think there are 3 places where I normally go myself. The first thing I do is I look at what the official guidance says, be it as it is. Then I look at what my community needs. So what are the specific needs of the young people or the context that I'm working with? What are their biggest priorities? What are their biggest challenges? What kinds of topics do we need to cover for that? And then the last thing I like to think about is what can I actually get support to run? So it's all well and good for me to be able to develop this career education program. It's going to be really robust. It's going to cover absolutely everything. But if I know that I'm not going to be able to get time within the class to be able to teach all of these things, or I'm not going to be able to take kids out of class time to go and do all of these different activities, then I need to maybe bring things in a little bit and be a bit more realistic. So I need to think about what I can actually get support for. So looking first at the official guidance, because I feel like if you know what the official guidance says, then that's a good place for me to be starting with. Doesn't mean you have to use it, but it does mean you've got it on the table. So within Australia, for example, we have the Australian Blueprint for Career Development. If you're elsewhere in the world, there are other career development frameworks. The Career Development Institute in the UK has a really great career development framework. In New Zealand, there is a career development framework, in Canada as well. So if your country has one of those career development frameworks, grab it. That is usually a really good place to start, because hopefully some people who are wiser than me have come up with these competencies and this framework that we can use as a bit of a scaffold and a guide. If you don't have one within your country or your context, or you've got one but you're not happy with it, I would recommend looking at what is being done elsewhere in the world and maybe even bringing a few of them together onto the table and looking at the things that are common to all of them, because that will give you a good starting point. Within the ABCD, the Australian Blueprint, there are 12 career management competencies and they cover 3 particular areas. So some of them are related to looking after ourselves, so personal management of our career, like how do we operate and behave and those kinds of things. Some are related to how to actually learn about the world of work and explore, so skills that will help us go and find out what we might be suitable for. And then the last learning area is related directly to the more practical side of things, like how do we actually go get a job? How do we keep everything in balance? How do we actually do that bit of going and getting a job? So these blueprint competencies also tie in quite well to other frameworks, so including things like the ACARA work studies. So within work studies, this is the Year 9 and 10 optional subject that ACARA have produced. In other places in the world, they will have other curriculum that hopefully that will give you a bit of an indication of what they want you to actually teach. In Australia, ours is entirely optional and it hasn't been updated for a while. But they cover similar things as what you saw in the blueprint before. So skills for learning a work and career and life design. And then there are some optional modules as well. And then wherever your location is. So if, for example, you're in Victoria, you might also have access to a more localized and state-based framework. Sometimes these are not as robust as things like the blueprint or the CDI's framework, and there might not be as many resources developed for them, but they're still good to bring to the table. So if I was in Victoria, for example, Victoria have this framework with 3 phases again that kind of map quite closely to those ones you saw in the blueprint, cover the same sort of things. And even if all that you've done is brought all that official guidance together and gone, oh yeah, okay, they're all covering similar things, but I know that we really need to be talking about understanding ourselves, knowing what's around us, knowing how to explore it, and then also having skills to manage our career, then that would be a good place to start. So as you can see, what I'm then going to do when I'm building my career education program is I'm going to put all of these three things together on the table. And I've used a graph. If you're working with a couple of colleagues, maybe you might want to literally print those things out and bring them to the table so that you can see kind of what fits into each section. So the next question I ask is, what do my students actually need? So that's really important to go to that, because if you just try and take an off-the-shelf program and don't apply it to what your students need, they're not going to necessarily see it's relevant. There are probably going to be things they did need that you've missed. There's probably going to be stuff they didn't really need that you've covered. You might not be covering it at the right time. So I think it's really important to think about what the students actually need. And like I said before, that can be really different. Your school could be literally just down the road from another school that has a different set of needs. Maybe more of their students take a different path. Maybe they're much more interested in healthcare than your students are. Whatever it is, your students are unique, and we need to know what it is that they need to be able to build this program. How I work that out is usually from talking to them and doing things like looking at what are the common pathways that they're taking post-school. So you should have some data on what your previous students have done or on what your senior students are planning on doing. Look at that. Where are they planning on going and what are they wanting to achieve? And then work backwards from that. So what skills do they need to access those pathways? Are there other pathways that they would prefer to take, but they don't have the skills to access those pathways, so they don't have the resources to access those pathways? Those are questions that I would want to be asking for myself. And then the last thing is looking at really within your student body, you've got your students, you've got what they need, but how do they make decisions about things going forward? Do they refer to their family? Is their family a significant player in this space? Because we know that often families have a lot of influence. Do they have a broader community and they need to talk to kin, or they need to talk to elders as well about this process? Are they quite an independent bunch and they just want to think it all through for themselves? Do they want to do some group work? Do you need to bring your students together because you know that you get the best out of them when they're all discussing ideas together? Think about those kinds of things as well, and then you can use that to structure your program. So back to my table, I would be putting down the things that my particular students need. In my hypothetical school, it might be that I know that my students in year 10 are very keen to go get their first jobs. So they're 15 odd years old, they're starting to want to earn some of their own money. So I would cover job readiness, or I would want to cover job readiness during that time so that they know things like their rights and responsibilities, how to keep themselves safe at work, how much they should be being paid. All of those things could be covered, and at a time when they actually need it. I don't really want to teach job readiness in year 8 because those students are too young. And by the time they're in year 11 and 12, if I'm teaching them how to write a resume, it's probably a bit late because probably half of them, or a good proportion of them, have already gone off and gotten their first jobs. So knowing like year 10 is a good spot for that. I might know that I have a lot of students who want to do something like early entry. So they might want to apply for university a little bit before and get their offers early. So I know that if I'm trying to crush that into the start of year 12, I'm going to be really struggling because they've got all the additional pressure of year 12. They're running out of time as it is, and they might only have 3 or 4 months before those applications start. So we might need to be talking about which unis they want to apply to back in year 11, getting them aware of what's available so they're really clear on where they want to apply in year 11, so that when it comes to year 12, it's a much easier process. Same thing, if I know that apprenticeships are popular, I might want to be talking about those from year 9, not waiting until my students are in year 10 at subject selection time with all of the other questions going, oh, well, do you also want an apprenticeship? Because it's a bit late at that point. They really probably need to have been understanding what an apprenticeship was and how the process works a little bit earlier on. And then the last thing out of my 3, so official guidance, what my students need and what I can get support for, or what's already being covered, is what is already being covered elsewhere. So within a school, lots of things happen, or another learning environment. It could be that you have another department that is really keen on goal setting. Maybe your health and PE department really likes to do goal setting early on in year 7 and 8. So you don't need to run that as part of your career education program. It could be that your science teachers have an awesome project that they run, or you're as part of citizenship or a business, there is some sort of entrepreneurial project that takes place, and that's going to be covering some of those skills as well, sort of things like self-advocacy. If your students are doing work experience, they might be getting some of those skills just prior to work experience. Like they might have to write a resume as part of their work experience application. So you can cover it then. At the same time, there are other people as well who offer something. So you might bring guest speakers into your school and they're going to cover a particular subset of what's needed. Or you might be sending students off to university to do tours and they might be talking about some of the pathways and things within that context. So you might not need to run another information session about university pathways because you know that's always covered when they go to open days or they go to experience days. So think about what you can kind of tick off already as, oh yeah, we're already doing a pretty good job with that. And that means that then you've got less that you're trying to cover in your program. So going back to my example, I might know that my year 9 and 10 humanities, my geography teachers have a really great topic that covers the local industries and the local labour market. They might go out to industries. They might have to do some reports on local industries. So I know that my local labour market is kind of already being covered and it's being covered at a really good time. Wouldn't it be lovely if that happened in every school? Same deal. We might know that year 7 and 8 do some goal setting, but that's all well and good, but it's very early on. And we need to come back to that in year 11, for example, and revisit goal setting and really think about how that's going to apply for those last few years of school. By the same token, if I know that maybe only 20% or 30% of my students are going to go get an apprenticeship, provided that all of them have been introduced to the concept and told that they understand what it is and how it works and they've made a decision that that's not for them, then when I'm delivering that more in-depth apprenticeship content, I know that I can just pick out that little subset of people who are actually keen or interested in an apprenticeship and deliver it just to them. And that's where your information sessions or your lunchtime sessions might be coming into play as well. So when I've got all of this on the table, it's going to really help me decide what it is that I actually need to cover within my career education program. The next piece of the puzzle is because, like I said before, we have them for this longer piece of time, we need to be thinking about how we can spread out that content and how we can best scaffold it so that they're developing skills but getting the chance to come back. So like I said before, with goal setting, we don't want to just be covering that in year 7 and 8. We want to come back to it over time. So how can we build their skills up over that process? So when we're talking about the early days of secondary school, this is in year 7 and 8 in Australia, it might be year 6, 7 and 8 elsewhere in the world. I like to think of it as really setting that groundwork, building that really great foundation. We know that at about the start of secondary school is when their vocational identity starts to crystallise. And you can see that if you talk to a year 7 student and then you ask them the whole way through secondary school what they think they might do when they leave, they'll probably have a pretty similar pathway to what they had in year 7 at the end of year 12. Might have changed a little bit, probably got a bit narrower, a bit more specific, but it probably would have been in a pretty similar pathway. So we know they've started to crystallise their vocational identity. So let's focus on then that groundwork. And for that, I'd like to think about strengths and preferences. So, and we can talk about the things they're already finding that they're good at and the things that they're already preferring. That really can help with a lot of things as well in terms of engagement. If you've got students who are maybe not quite sure why they're there or they're struggling to fit into secondary school, broadening out their ideas of what strengths look like away from just pure academics can be really powerful with that. I also like to think really local in those year 7 and 8. So that can help them understand that their career is something that is real. At the minute in year 7 and 8, it can seem like it's a long way away. It can seem like this far off distant thing they don't have to worry about. But if you can start to bring some local industries in, get them talking to them, get them seeing how people work locally, it stops it from being just something that mum and dad do or whoever's caring for them does and starts being something that is part of their future and a future that is not that far away from them. And then the last thing I like to do in year 7 and 8 is I really like to think about how they can start to build experience. And usually at that stage, we're talking about through things like team sport, through extracurricular activities, taking part in competitions, even chores and helping out in the community and at home. If they're thinking about how all of those activities are going to be preparing them for what they might do after school, they bring a different mindset. They might pick different things. They might approach how they engage with the things that they're doing differently. So it's really, I think it's really important to start that discussion at those early days of secondary. When they start to get into those middle years, it becomes a bit more practical. I love that all of a sudden you'll see them and they they want to go get their first job. So you're suddenly a really important person in their life because you can help them when other people maybe don't have as much confidence in that zone. So it's a different kind of phase that we're talking about in these middle years of school. They're also going to be asked to make a lot of choices. We don't see a whole heap of decision making happening in year 7 and 8 or those younger years, and not in those later years either. In those later years, it's usually quite specific by that point. But in these middle years, we are asking them to kind of pick which pathway they're going to go down. Are they going to go down an academic route? Are they going to follow a trade? Are they going to look and focus on employment? What is it that they really want to focus on? So in order to do that, in order to make those choices and those decisions, we need to build up those decision-making skills. Give them skills like the ability to take feedback, because taking feedback isn't something that's natural. It can feel a bit difficult sometimes taking feedback. So we have to help them practice that. We have to then take those skills that we taught them in those earlier years about what exists locally and going, okay, so if we know that that's what exists, what does that mean? What does that mean for the likelihood of you getting a role in the pathway that you're thinking of? What does it mean for whether or not you're going to be able to stay, or if maybe you're going to have to leave to go and find the pathway that you want to pursue? So all of those things can come in. And in these middle years, we're also talking about subject selection and work experience. So with subject selection, depending on how you run it, it will really dictate what kind of education you deliver around that. But I think it's really great to use that focal point because all of them have to go through subject selection. Use it to kind of build a lot of those decision-making skills. So don't just approach it as have an information session, pick some subjects, maybe have one conversation and be done with it. Use it as an opportunity. You can do things like hold subject information expos. You can have teachers pitch their subjects to students, or have senior students do presentations about the subjects for junior students. Whatever it is you want to do. It's also a great opportunity to bring family in. So family, we know they're so important, and you can use these as like stealth opportunities to say, here's all the subjects. And also we would like it if you were calm and let your young person make their decision for themselves because they're going to have to follow it through. All of these things that we can build into family information evenings and information sessions that help the young person as well as the family cope with that process. So that's really important. And then also look at when we're building out subject selection, look at what's working. So you've probably already been doing subject selection. There's probably already elements of it that are working really well. Make sure you amplify those at the same time. Work experience, it is slightly different to subject selection because not every school and not every student will do or have the opportunity to do work experience. If you don't, that's okay. In any case, you can still use the fact that it often happens in those middle years of school as an opportunity to do things like that work readiness, so that job readiness. Get every student writing a resume, get every student practicing their interview skills, get every student searching for jobs and for work experience opportunities and practicing all of that, because even if they don't get to do work experience, it'll still help them. And then look at those other things that you can do in line with that. So there are a lot of different work experience alternatives that you can tap into as well. And then finally, talking about how we can cover this curriculum over years, we get to these senior years of school. And sometimes I have careers advisors tell me that they don't have any access to their students in the senior years. And that makes sense, right? Because they're very busy. It's very important. There's a lot happening. My own son is currently just about to start his final exams. So I know how hectic these last few years can be. But that doesn't mean that you can't deliver some sort of career education. You don't want it to be like a wasteland between the end of their middle years of high school and then their end of school. You don't want them to not have any access to content, because that's kind of the most important point. That's the bit where they're making those decisions and they need to be having those conversations. And it's not just about delivering content then, it's also about giving them the opportunity to have those conversations, ask those questions. I find it works best if you can make it really practical. So really address the kinds of decisions or the kinds of choices that they're having to make at the time that they're having to make them. And it might mean that you need to tailor lessons and think really carefully about exactly what they're doing at what time, and then bring those lessons in at that point. Or if you've got 10 things maybe you want to cover over the 2 years, think carefully about how you're going to scaffold them so that they've had the content and the conversations before they actually need to submit their applications or make whatever decisions it is. I also like to talk about things that will hopefully help them later on in life and when they've left school. So things like what sort of lifestyle do they expect to have and how are they going to pay for that? Because not everyone's thought about those things. Thinking about personal and professional branding. Very soon, there are going to be employers looking them up online. So we often talk about things like how to protect and make your profiles private and be careful about what you're doing there. And I also love to build out networks within those senior years because we haven't really talked about that in those middle years, particularly not in those early years and then not so much in the middle. But when we get to these senior years, then networks are going to be really powerful resources for them to help them find opportunities and employment when they leave school. So whatever we can do to make the networking process less scary while they're in those senior years, the better. And that might mean things like holding breakfasts, community breakfasts where you bring people in, or inviting parents in to talk about, do career speed dating or whatever it is, but build up those networking skills as well. And then also giving them those practical stuff. And you might find that some of your other teachers or your heads of year also want to deliver some of that more practical stuff. So you don't need to cover that as well. But if it's not being covered, or you might even just want to be able to signpost guest speakers or something to help them if they've got room to cover that but aren't covering it already. So that's how I design a career education program. Those are the things that I think about when I'm designing a career education program. I start out by looking at what good outcomes would be for my young people. Then I look at the kinds of things that I want to cover within that program. Official guidance is a good starting point for that, but also looking at what my students need and looking at what's already been covered. And then when I've got all that information, then I scaffold that over my year levels so that I've got this lovely sequential scaffolded career development process happening. But to finish off, I thought it was really important to mention the role that students can play within building your career education program. This isn't something that you have to build entirely on your own. You can bring your students to the table and ask them for their opinions, their ideas, their feedback, even right at the start, even when you're at that process where you're working out what good looks like, bring them into the room and get them to tell you what they think good outcomes would look like. And don't forget to amplify their voices. So if they've helped you co-design your career education program, make sure that you can take that up to your school leadership and then say, well, this is what I think we need to be delivering, but this is also what the students have said. And then the final thing is just be really aware that one set of students in one year level will change. So that your career education program isn't going to be something that can sit in a box and be static and just be pulled out exactly the same way year after year after year. Every single year, you're probably going to need to go back and tweak it for the particular cohorts and tweak what happens at different year levels based on your cohort so that it suits the students and really helps them build the skills that they need along the way. I hope that all of that information has been helpful, and I wish you all the best with developing your own career education programs.